if we'd have class or not. Can't tell with this sometimes. So there is something absolutely beautiful when we're sending our kids to camp and they're coming home being baptized, and you see all that spiritual growth and you see all that excitement, and it's just good for a congregation, isn't it? It's just exciting to see and a wonderful thing to see happening through the summer. So I was really happy about all of that. You know, we did Parker. He obeyed the gospel last week, and Art of Grace, of course, obeyed the gospel today. His mama is up in, I think, is it Indiana? Indiana, with some cousins, and so she'll be home this afternoon. But they were FaceTiming and had all sorts of technology going on up there. So she may have had a better view than any of us because of that. So it worked out pretty good. That was good stuff. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles, Genesis 49. We're going through our tribes as you look at the study of each one of the sons of Jacob. And what you'll notice, in many ways, one of the things people have done with Genesis 49 is they've turned it into an outline of the Old Testament. And you could go through and study each one of these tribes and the prophecy and the members of the tribes and see kind of how God is working with his people through the Old Testament. That's how this started when I was writing it, and then I thought, I'll just go a different direction. But it would have been a good way, probably a better way to go. We're just looking at each tribe and seeing the role that they play. But if you put it in the outline of the Old Testament, where Zebulun would be is from Judges 5 until about 2 Samuel 14. 2 Samuel chapter 3. It would be that early era of David and also the very end of the Judges, because that's where we see the most significant stuff from Zebulun through there. And so Genesis 49, verse 13. Let me look and make sure. Yeah. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea, and he shall become a haven for ships, and his borders shall join Sidon. All right, now part of the issue that happens with this is when you look at Zebulun, it's away from the Mediterranean Ocean. And so that's a little bit strange. But what you'll notice is actually Zebulun butts up against the Sea of Galilee. And so many of the Galileans that you read of in the New Testament, when we get over there, they are from this tribe. And actually, that's one of the things we're going to learn as we look through this and see this sort of thing. The primary person that we see figure from this tribe, is a fellow named Elon, and he's one of the judges, and you'll find him in Judges 12. He is the judge that comes right before, or maybe two judges before Samson. Samson's Judges 13 through 16. All right. Zebulun's Jacob's 10th son, the sixth one born by Leah. And so you begin reading about him in Genesis chapter 30. And of course, you remember as we studied this several weeks ago, all these boys are coming out of a rough family dynamic. What you see is two women wrestling over the same man. Jacob married Leah, and he also married Rachel. Rachel was his pride and joy, the good-looking wife that he chose. Leah was the older sister, and she did not compare in looks at all to her sister. But the father was anxious to sell her off, to get rid of her. So she comes over, and she's married to Jacob. And you see where Leah and Rachel are wrestling back and forth. The husband loves Rachel, even though Rachel can't have many children. She can't have any children here for a while. Leah is having children left and right, trying to earn her husband's love. And so when Zebulun is born, what you'll see is his name means a dwelling place, a house, or it means a honor. And the reason Zebulun's given that name honor is Leah, as he's born, says, this is our sixth son I've had. Number 6, I've had with my husband. Hopefully now he will love me. Hopefully now he will honor me because I am producing children for him. I'm producing something that he should love. And so you see that family dynamic that's going there and how difficult it is when you go through. But as you look at it, you see that he was like everybody else, didn't really change Jacob's opinion of either one of his wives. He was just another child who grew up, maybe a major middle child, being number 6 of 13 as you come through, or 6 of 12 as you come through. But as we said before, the prophecy is a little bit hard to understand because he's not by the Mediterranean Sea, he's over by the Sea of Galilee. But also, when you look, he's on some major trading routes. And so Zebulun's going to be a major player as far as bringing in income and things such as that. Now, there's something, and this sort of applies to every single tribe, but go ahead and look over in Deuteronomy chapter 27. We're going to bring this up with Zebulun and also a later tribe as well. And when you come to here in chapter 27 of Deuteronomy, you see where they are called to recite some of the law. Let me find it here. Deuteronomy chapter 27. What you have here, beginning in verse 11, is they come up to Mount Gerizim, which is just short of where Mount Sinai is. This is an area about to cross into the Red Sea, about to cross into the land of Israel. And as they go there, they enter an area that's a natural atrium, if you will. And remember, back at this time, they didn't have microphones like we do. Now, if you turn off this microphone, what you'll notice in this auditorium, the way that it's created and structured is pretty interesting as far as volume goes. I guess you learn these things as a preacher. You'll notice on either side, there are buffers. See those little cushion things on the columns there? That deadens sound. So it's designed where if you're on the edges, you're not going to have much echo or reverb happening in this building. But also what happens is if you are on that side of the auditorium or that side of the auditorium, the singing doesn't sound great. It almost sounds like you're just hanging out by yourself, right? And so it doesn't work very great because the issue with the reverb is there. Now, if you sit here in the middle, and the most hot place is what they would say, not temperature-wise, the hottest place is right here. There's a curve that happens in the auditorium right here. And so you can take off your mic and almost be, can you all hear me pretty clearly? All right. Can you all hear me pretty clearly? Pretty much, because my sound's going through, get all this area, and the echo brings it back down. And so that's why you may notice, you don't know this, but our church people in charge, if you're a good singer, we let you sit here, right, Bill? If you're a bad singer, you're over there or over there. Not really. I don't think anybody controls where anybody sits, you know. It's just one of those things. The people that sit behind us all the time didn't sit behind us this Sunday. And I turned to him and I said, dude, I showered and everything. And he said, somebody sat in our spot, so we couldn't sit there, so they had to move somewhere else. But I was very nervous because they did not sit in their regular place. Well, sound works with this sort of thing. Now, back in this time, they noticed that much better than we do. So they went to Mount Ebal, and it's 2 mountains next to each other. We would think more of hills. And, of course, there's not much vegetation there, to where if you speak, it would echo and you could hear. And so, in a sense, you're able to talk to the entire nation. And so what Moses does is he brings the nation there, at least the representatives of all the tribes. It looks like the whole nation's there, actually. Almost, million plus people. And as they're there, everybody has some words that they're supposed to say, laws that they're supposed to say. And Zebulun's on this side, others are on this side, and they're all speaking back one to another, reciting the law. Moses realized, especially in a pre-literate day, some people were able to write, but not everybody was able to write and read, the importance of memory. And you remember something more than if you just hear it. You remember it more so if you speak it as well, and you remember it more so if you write it. And so that's what's going on here in Numbers chapter 27. And so as he sets them up, let's go ahead and begin here in verse 11. Moses commands the people on the same day, those on Mount Gerizim, verse 12. Okay, when you've crossed the Jordan, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin, you're going to stand on Mount Ebal, and you're going to say the curse. Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, that's who we're talking about, verse 13, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites shall speak with a strong voice and say to the people of Israel, and they're going to go through and speak each one of these curses back and forth, and that is, if they're unfaithful, these curses will be upon them. What were some of the curses? 27 verse 15, cursed is any man who casts an idol or an image, anything detestable to the Lord. Look down to verse 19, cursed is a man who withholds justice from the alien, fatherless, or widow. Still another, 26, cursed is a man who does not uphold the words of this law by obeying or carrying them out. And so Zebulun, from verse 10 through 26, calls forth every one of these things to come through. All right, so now we've received the law. Joshua, we conquer the people, but now we get to Judges, chapter 1 and verse 30. Zebulun received their allotment of land, but they did not drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron and Nahal. But instead, Zebulun subjected them to slavery. Now, God had judged the people of Canaan, had told them they had 400 years to put their act together, and if they didn't, they, their children, and everything they had would be wiped out. Those 400 years were up. Israel was here to give the retribution of God. They were to come through and totally clear out the people and kill everyone who was there. Instead, Zebulun came through and made these people slaves. Now, why would it be preferential to make people slaves instead of killing them? Why would Zebulun want to do that? All right, man, I'm tired of mowing the yard. It'd be awesome. I used to tell people that's the whole reason I had kids. Man, I'm tired of mowing this yard. I'm going to raise some kids up. All right, cooking, cleaning, all these things. It's a lot better to have a slave. Even better, if you have a slave, you can sell them and get really rich. And so what's going through the minds of a lot of these people as they enter into the land of Judges, as we get to that point, God said, wipe these people out. God said, to totally get rid of them. If we make them slaves, water carriers, or whatever, our life's a little easier, our life's a little better, things will work greatly. All right? What was wrong with that idea, besides it being against God's will? What ended up happening? They outnumbered the Israelites. The Indians outnumbered the chiefs. Did you get in trouble? Absolutely. And influence. What's influence? What was their influence upon the Israelites? Turn them away from God. Absolutely. Turn them away from God. And so there you are. You've got these issues which would happen. Now, is there a lesson for that today? God says, hey, listen, wipe out all the iniquity out of your heart. I don't want there to be any worldliness in you. How do many Christians do? I've got most of the bad stuff out, and I still show up at church. I just have a little bit of worldliness, just the fun parts there. What ends up happening to us as time goes on if we have a little bit of worldliness remain in us? Yeah, the worldliness will grow. We lose our faithfulness to God, and we begin to compromise and do things we would not do otherwise. So that's what's going on with the Zebulunites as we go through here, and we see all this stuff happening. The promise was, I think it's Numbers 33:52, that if you did not drive the people out, when Moses said drive the people out, that they would come back and eventually haunt you and destroy you and cause great problems. So that is the shortcoming that Zebulun had. But they had some strong points too. You go to Judges chapter 5 and verse 18. Whenever Israel, the time came for them to fight, one of the largest fighting forces always came from Zebulun. Zebulun had some really good fighters, and they were always on call whenever God's people needed them. They showed up, and they absolutely were there. You go to 1 Chronicles 12 and verse 33. They were the largest tribe to support David. When David was becoming king, when Saul had finally passed, and David was trying to unify the people, Zebulun were the people, the tribe next to Judah, who said, we're here, you're God's anointed, and we're going to fight for you and make sure you are there for God's purpose. And so on that aspect, it's pretty good stuff that you see. It's a pretty good thing that you see going on. All right, let's look at 3 major lessons which we have here about Zebulun. Lesson number 1, and I think we've discussed it a little bit, the danger of unrepented sin. I like to put it this way. Sin is never satisfied. You ever see a person who is never satisfied? You give them maybe an amount of money, and they want more, and they want more, and they want more. There's the old tale about Rockefeller. You remember Rockefeller was the richest man of his time. As a matter of fact, his assets totaled almost half of the U.S. economy. Several times when the economy crashed, he was able to bail out the U.S. economy. Imagine being that wealthy. One time a guy was interviewing him, a reporter, and he said, Rockefeller, how much more money do you really need? Just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. That's all he said. You know, it's never satisfied. He always needs a little more money. Sin's going to be that way in your life. You and I may want to compromise and say, okay, I'm going to give myself completely to God except for this part. It's never going to be satisfied. It's always going to grow. It's always going to mature. And the wages, the earnings of sin is, Romans 6:23, death. The wages of sin is death. But the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus. I always want to remember that part of that verse. But if you sin, the wages is death. That's what you get when you have sin in your life. Lesson number 2, forgiveness and redemption. Even though Zebulun did not obey the way they needed to, when they came back with Deborah and Barak, Judges chapter 4 and verse 6, 5 chapter 18, Elon, was the judge in chapter 12, verse 11. They helped David greatly. What you see is even though this tribe started off in a difficult place, there was redemption and they accomplished great things. So you see some neat stuff here. Now, in talking about redemption, you'll notice if you go back to the blessing, they're going to be great among the Gentiles. They're going to make great wealth among the Gentiles, right? If you look at where Zebulun is, it is right next to the Sea of Galilee. In the New Testament, we know them as the Galileans, all right? Now begin thinking about the apostles. There was only one apostle from the same tribe as Judah. You remember who he was? It's who you wouldn't think. It was a fellow who betrayed Jesus. Judas. Judas was the only person who was related by tribe to Jesus, a person from the tribe of Judah. The other 11 spoke like who? Remember when they were in front of the synagogue, in front of the rulers? These people had the accent of Galileans, right? They had the accent of Galileans. We don't know exactly what each apostle tribe came from. Paul came from Benjamin. Judas came from Judah. The rest of them were Galileans. Many of them, maybe all of them, were from the tribe of Zebulun. Now, why is that significant? They went to the Gentiles. While some of them preached to the Jews, the vast majority were spread and went to the Gentiles, and they made great profit among all the nations. In a sense, what you're seeing there in 49 is Jacob looking forward not only to the monetary wealth of the Zebulunites, but also to the spiritual wealth with the apostles. And so that's something kind of interesting, at least for me, to look at and to think about that you see there, is God's redemption, especially through some tribes, that really seems so insignificant. Yes, sir, Dan?
Also in Bible studies
Yes.
and history, the Galilean fish were salted and were all over the Roman Empire. They were very influential community.
Yeah, that's right. He's speaking of, in that first century, Galilean fish, when they were salted, that's how you would preserve the meat back then. They were a delicacy all over the Roman Empire. People liked fish from that area and the way in which they were fixed as well.
Lake is still very productive.
Yeah, the Sea of Galilee is still a very productive place as far as how that works. And so even, you would hear, when you hear that, speaking of Jacob, you think, oh, they're going to be by the Mediterranean Ocean or sea. They're going to have a navy and all these sort of things. And you look and you say, man, they're just by this little lake. Galilee is nothing compared to Kentucky Lake. But still, it's an area which accomplishes pretty good stuff. God works through these people, and even though they fell short when they opened up because they weren't completely obedient, it's amazing to see what exactly God was able to overcome. And so that's something pretty interesting to see. And really, a lot of that's our third point here. Thirdly, we see God rewards his people eventually, although they may suffer at the very beginning. Whenever there was an incursion going through the book of Judges, oftentimes they were the first guys hit because they were like on the edge. But God still rewarded them and helped them. There's a prophecy, Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 1, that says, in the past, God humbled the Zebulunites, but in the future, he shall honor Galilee because who comes from there. And we're looking at that as far as the preaching of Christ and also those apostles. Where did Jesus spend the majority of his ministry? Galilee. Working through this area and accomplishing some of these great things that would come through. And so that's kind of what you see as you go through, and I'm traveling pretty quick here because of our shorter class lesson. That's kind of what you see is you begin at the very beginning. This is son number 6 out of 12 coming from Leah. So you can imagine middle child syndrome going on, right? You ever have a grandmother, and maybe your mother if you had enough brothers and sisters, who, when they had to call you, ended up going through about 6 names so they got to you? Did that ever happen to any of y'all? I remember my grandmother, I was like, I don't know, I guess child number 6 or whatever. And so, you'd have to go through all the time. And I remember she'd always miss like the one before me, and I have to correct her so then she could get to my name, That's the way it is with some folks. Any of y'all relate to that? Well, this is Zebulun. Zebulun probably never heard his name because Jacob is going, okay, let's see, who's that? To finally get to that one. You go from insignificant, you go from not completely faithful, to you go to these tribes who stand up and fight for God, and then you go to the Messianic time, Jesus' time, and you see God really working through his people, working through your tribe to bless all the nations. Now, the reason I like that is now we bring that to today. Paul says God did not call the rich, the wise, the popular to Jesus. Who did he call? The simple, people who maybe in the minds of others don't matter as much. And God took those people and used for his purpose. Why does God work that way? Who's the glory go to? Glory goes to God. Because We don't accomplish things by our own talent. We accomplish things by God's talent. And so God always finds a little shepherd boy to kill the giant. God always finds the person who is born in Nazareth, Bethlehem, to accomplish great things. God works the same way with us. And so God can take you if you're insignificant. God can take you if you begin with a lot of issues in life, not living exactly the way, but trying. God can take you from that point and can accomplish awesome, mighty, great, and wonderful things. And that's a lesson we learn from what seems to us to be somewhat of an insignificant tribe. That's a lesson we learn about each and every one of us today. So think back when Moses called everybody to the Mount Ebal, and as they're at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim speaking back and forth, you can imagine how God realized these people speaking this, they're going to live it through their children. And they're going to accomplish great, mighty, and wonderful things. All right, any comments or thoughts? Didn't think we'd have a lot about Zebulun, but sometimes you do. All right, we got 2 minutes. What's our rule if you get out early in the auditorium? No running in the halls. All right, don't want you running over the kids. Okay? Thanks a lot for being here.